everyone. Definitely Mercury retrograde. Um, Definitely the day before this major astrological square um, aspect with Saturn and Venus and Jupiter and Mercury, and on the 19th of August. Whew. Mm. But all of that aside, we are here to start talking about omnidimensional authors. Yes, like myself. So, I guess I'm going to kind of start to go into the history of how. Let me first, let's define omnidimensional authors. The current definition of omnidimensional authors are persons who use their alternative abilities to receive information and translate it into a literary or media work for others to access that information. Now, what are alternative abilities? Alternative abilities are what I have been classifying or defining as my multitudes of remembering have allowed me for decades in this lifetime now of the clairs. So, clairtangency, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience. There's like 12 of them. And so all of the clairs, all of the mancies, all of the pathies, so telepathy, um, all of the astrals, astral traveling, astral dimensional, all the divinations, so tarot, runes, bones, tea leaves, palmistry, um, all of the different classes, synchronicities, anything that is classified in the last maybe 150 years as being occult, esoteric, metaphysical, spiritual, any of the alternative abilities that come through either you're born with them or they're in various states of remembering and cultivation and practice. Alternative abilities that are, for the most part, that have been shunned by most of Western society, alienated, cast out, to take the power away from us of our innate abilities. So those are alternative abilities. And I'm claiming new definitions for all of these things so that they will not be under the current monikers of esoteric and occult, which basically mean hidden, forbidden, not known, all of that, because these are all abilities that we all can cultivate. Like I said, some of us in certain lifetimes are born into them. But we can all cultivate these and be able to work and practice with them and remember them. And many indigenous teachers, ding ding, confirmation, um, many indigenous teachers and wisdoms have helped a lot of people be able to see this in their lives over the years and have kept those ancient wisdoms from, the powers trying to control them for thousands of years now. So that's the definition of an omnidimensional author. Now, the definition can expand or it can change, but for the most part, that is what I'm defining this canon from. And yes, I am the one that is putting out this new literary personage and moniker and definition for our canon. Because one of the things, so I'm going to go into the history of how this came to me. In the first place, I've been writing and receiving awards since elementary school in this lifetime for my poetry, for my short stories. And just as one of our omnidimensional authors, or OAs, in our canon, Fernando Pessoa, I've been living dimensionally with many monikers over different decades in this lifetime alone. Now, I'm not quite up to the heteronyms, the amount of heteronyms that Fernando Pessoa, the famous Portuguese poet at the turn of the century, had. He had over 78 of them. But I have had, and I do have, my fair share of monikers for different dimensionalities of my personage. So, it's basically going to be up to history and my sons and this community to pull out all of my heteronyms. Maybe when I'm older, I'll diagnose all of them for everyone and pull out all of the different various literary works that I've had over the years. But I've been living as other authors and poets have been living for this entire lifetime, and I had no idea. And it really took me, pursuing my PhD and getting into specifically my alma mater, Naropa University, which is a Buddhist university in Boulder, Colorado, and and how Naropa was founded. So it's already a spiritual and ineffable based institution, which is a rarity. But it was founded from the Beat Poets and by Anne Waldman and her entire, not entire, but many of the Beat Poets, Diane DePrima. There were so many of them that were attributed to Naropa's beginnings as a poetry school. So my master's is in poetics from the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at Naropa University. And that is when all of this channeling that I've been doing my entire lifetime and all the pieces that I've been putting together started to really open up. And since then, and in my doctoral research, which is in a different field of transdisciplinarity, it's in compassionate technology, but I had done a lot of preliminary post or pre-doctoral research, and I've done a lot of research now, and I'm still paralleling doctoral research with this literary personage and authorship. And so I've gotten into, since really starting to diagnose, that there were a lot of other poets and authors in the world, because I'd never really participated with a whole lot of poetry readings or, trying to get my pieces always published. I would put them out there and then they would just win an award. It was like effortless for me my whole life. And so I never really tried to do very much. The things that I've already channeled and produced just go into international museums as soon as they're done. And so I never had to sit there and cultivate a bunch of stuff in a community and all this stuff. So I didn't really understand the history of who had been doing what and for how long and how they'd been doing it until I got into my master's program. And then in my master's program, I really found out a lot more about many poets. In fact, some of the Beat poets, like Diane DePrima, who was a founding member also in a lot of ways and participated in a lot of ways with my alma mater and Naropa's poetic division. Come to find out, she was a medium, and she had been actively participating as a medium since she was a teenager, since she decided to become a poet. And so it was over the course of a couple of years through my master's program, and then subsequently for the last 3-4 years in my doctoral program, that I've been doing research initially towards a thesis, a dissertation thesis, based within the translative axioms of ineffable literature. But that shifted once I got into my doctoral program, because I realized that compassionate technology is really where so much of my passion and experience in this lifetime lies. But I didn't put down the research that I had already been doing for ineffable translations, because I had already realized that I had started building a canon, and that there are very, very distinct interwoven linkages between different poets and different authors between different centuries. And I'll describe some of them here, and which have started to provide a basis of a canon and a basis of an understanding for this new literary personage and title and definition. Now, when it first started to come out, when I was at University of Massachusetts Amherst, in the mid 2000s, I was in a poetics program for my undergraduate, and I had already channeled because I had been channeling future beings since 2012. And so a lot of my academic institute education for the last over a decade has been focused around, this is who I've been my entire life in this lifetime and many lifetimes since. Then I've realized and remembered, but that I'm not alone and that there are a lot of people that have been doing a lot of this stuff, and we haven't had that recognition because it's been being sparsed out into different literary personages and genres, but it's not being called for what it actually is and what we are actually doing, even though there's legal parameters around it that have been established for over almost 100 years. In 3 years, we will have had a legal parameter established for omnidimensional authors in England for 100 years. So, besides this live and all of those that participate and are here, thank you for being here. And all of those that are going to watch these subsequent lives on my YouTube channel. I'm finally being told, and I was told this summer because I've been incubating on this stuff, on all of this information on the titleage, which has shifted into multiple iterations over the last 6 years and come to settle into omnidimensional authors. I've gotten confirmation from other scholars on the alignment of that nomenclature for this. Hi, thanks for being here. I'm sorry that things have taken so long to get started. So, anyways, I just went into the history of, or the definition of omnidimensional authors. And this is like my history, how I've gotten here. And this name this summer has just gotten validated by another high scholar in my PhD program. And my PhD program is a transdisciplinary leadership program at CIIS, which is California Institute of Integral Studies. So, one of the things that I already mentioned is that my master's was through Naropa, which is a Buddhist university. And it was started with Trungpa Rinpoche when he came here from Tibet in the 50s and 60s. And then the beat poets got together with him, and then Naropa formed. Well, CIIS had a very, very similar trajectory around the same time in the late 50s and through the 60s when it started to become formed, because there were Stanford professors that started realizing that the ancient and indigenous teachings of India, or that whole Asiatic Indo region, were very, very valuable. They were coming into this height of the 60s, and they were looking for teachers, they were looking for mentors, they were looking for deep wells of information to be able to bring back to the Americas and help enlighten. Even scholars at that time were very much being driven to bring this remembered state of ancient indigenous wisdoms and practices from different varied cultures back into Western society to help re-amplify our collective enlightenment. And it was happening during the 60s. So a lot of things happened during the 60s, especially in America and for people that know American history. So, my master's program is in a spiritually or ineffably aligned place. And my PhD program, which shifted from Harvard during the pandemic to CIIS for so many different reasons, is also highly aligned from more of an omnidimensional place. And I'll go into how this has all been confirmed. Like I said, even up to this summer, in the last couple of months with me, I am literally telling you everything that's been coming through me for years, and that is finally all started to come together so that I can present it to everybody else in the world and say, here, I know that we have existed for a long time. I know we all exist now. And let's start building this canon together. Let's start recognizing each other for the work that we're doing and using our alternative abilities to receive information from the ineffable, from different dimensions, different othernesses and beings, from different places, and translating that into a literary piece or a media piece for others to then be able to connect to. So, this really, I started tapping into the terminology of multidimensional years ago. In fact, when I was at Naropa and finishing my master's, I actually started looking into scholarship within the parapsychology fields around multidimensionality because had already known that I was living a dimensionality. I was not just existing in this, what most people would call the real static dimension. I was already accessing, receiving information, and translating from other dimensional forms, from other beings. And it was being validated. I was having my cannabis tarot put into museums around the world. It's in 5 museums, including MIT's Distinguished Collection. I was having the oraculum shared all throughout the world, and now has an incredibly sacred backing to it, and an incredible network. So everybody that has an oraculum, like, I need to bring you back in too and help us connect, because I know that these things that I've been channeling and putting out there, just like the other OAs, just like the other omnidimensional authors have been doing for hundreds of years, we have been helping usher in this new remembering of living dimensionally, and not living from this static presence, but being in what other people call the 5D, right? Other people have been calling it 4, 5, 6D for a while too. And I'm telling you that there is a particular literary personage and title that has been doing this for hundreds of years, and there's this thread that you can see that I have been able to see now. And that's why all of these people are being brought into this canon. But we are out there now. We exist. I want to start, bringing us together, so that we can diagnose more of the other previous authors, poets, writers that are also part of our canon, whether they just produced one piece through an alternative ability or with an alternative ability, or whether their entire, you know, um, canon and catalog has these interwoven elements of alternative abilities through them. Now, a lot of people have kept this, authors and poets have kept these things private for many, many centuries, because this was all heresy. This was all stuff that you could be executed for. There were scribes, there were nuns that were part of more of a bogomil and a cathar, alignment within Christ consciousness hundreds of years ago, like Hildegard. Uh, oh, I'm forgetting Saint Hildegard de Bingen, um, who produced an amazing amount of work, and that are in this canon, but because of different, religious and just the time and the era that they were, heresy was very real, and a lot of people could not actually say, unless it was under a religious context, that they were channeling information, that they were receiving information from ineffable spaces. And so, largely, what we have are religious texts from before the 1800s, but there are some people that have been producing since the 1800s, since this psychical society started forming in the mid to late 1800s, and this enlightenment period started really, coming to the forefront through the fields. And what they've tried to do is encapsulate it and keep control over it under parapsychology. And it's been underfunded since the turn of the century. It's still a pseudoscience. There's plenty of these things that they've been giving monikers to with pseudo, right? So this is one of the stands that one of the OAs made 100 years ago. Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese poet, he had what he called heteronyms, not pseudonyms, because anything pseudo is considered fake. And so they're putting pseudoscience under these classifications of like parapsychology, because they're trying to give it a vessel that immediately makes people repel it as being fake. And in the time that we're in, people are now like doing the opposite. They're like, oh, this is fake news, I'm going to watch it, right? But 100 years ago, 300 years ago, if they were putting a spell of the language over something, that's why esoteric as a word and definition does not fit anymore. That's why occult as a word, as a definition, does not fit anymore, because these things are not hidden. They're available to all of us. And if we do certain things like practices of opening up our dimensionality, remembering our dimensionality, and another reason why I'm putting this out there, because the more that we call it out, the more that we embody it, the more that we accept it and build canons around it of academic measure, we are using the spells that they have cast upon us to keep these powers from us, to open them back up. And that's exactly what I'm doing with my academic research and my being in this world. I am opening back up academia to use their own spells against them, so that we can have this collective information again, and we can remember who we really are and what our true abilities are, which alternative abilities have a lot to do with those. So omnidimensional authors. Let me start talking about some of them that are already in the canon, and then I'll tell you about the interwoven pieces of how it's come through me. It's been coming through my institution, especially CIIS. I absolutely have been being spoken to by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother for years, and I didn't even realize it until this summer, because their voices are like, how do you say, a collective voice, and so it's more of an overall knowledge. And they've been leading me. And I finally started seeing some of the absolute, golden threads that are like forming through academic authorship for centuries. So, the first one that I want to say, besides hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, that are under religious context, because that has to be a classification in and of itself. And just to let everybody know, on cannabistarot.com, I am building out the omnidimensional authors canon, and I have it so that it has its own distinct page right now. I'm sure it'll become many, many more things after this, but I'm starting it on the cannabistarot.com website. And I'm building out the different elements of the canon, because different OAs use different alternative abilities to be able to receive the information and then translate it and produce it into a literary or a media work for others. So I'm building this canon out, but these are some of the people that I have already designated as OAs for different reasons. And I try to get into that a little bit with the descriptions, and I give links to different elements of their works or who they were, so that people can read them more thoroughly and understand, oh, well, this is under the divination category of OAs. And then they can go and see, more about who that author was, or who that poet was, and what did they do, and where I've been receiving information that makes them a part of the categorization of OAs, and the canon, or it puts their work into the canon. So the first one, besides hundreds of years ago, and the religious OAs, which eventually will be its own, distinction, and it really is right now, like it's under theology. Like theology has distinguished a certain amount of these people, and parapsychology has distinguished a certain amount of these people, but literature has not. The literary field has not distinguished, and this is a very, very important indicator here. I felt it within my own self, and when I started seeing that it was true of other people, when I started asking at UMass Amherst, in the poets department, is there a classification of a poet or a person that channels information, receives information from the ineffable, and translates it for people? And they did not know. Now, I can just say it was maybe that institution, but after all of these years, I've still not found a different moniker that specifically addresses people that do this. There are subsets of it. There are divinatory poetics. There are subsets of this, but there is not an actual classification of a new literary personage and moniker the way that I'm putting it out there. And that was a shame to me, because not only do I associate with this and have successfully with the pieces that I've published in the world this entire lifetime, But then I started finding other people that were being diagnosed and addressed as poets, as beat poets, but they were never, ever really properly given any kind of classification that acknowledged their alternative abilities, alternative abilities. And when I found the ruling from 1927 in England, it's Cummings versus England. And it literally has to do with that whole explosion and amplification of Madame Blavatsky, of the cyclical movement in the late 1800s and the turn of the century, and how so many people were channeling information and putting it into literary pieces. England actually classified almost 100 years ago, 1927, actually found in a legal proceeding and has on its laws that whoever is the translator of information from an ineffable place or space is the legal recipient, is the legal citation of that source, because there is that translatory element of it, of receiving that information from whatever dimension, whatever otherness, what other alternative ability that they'd used. And it is the translator, it is that writer, it is that poet, it is that, artist that is translating that. That owns that, legally owns that citation. So we've had legal precedence on who we are for over 100 years, and nobody has been talking about this, and the literary community has not been talking about this or designated a personage towards this. And our canon is vast. So before this all started happening, and after, the heresy kind of started to die down a little bit in the 1800s, there was one poet, a young man, named Arthur Rimbaud. And he's cited by many, many historic poets over the last 150 years. But he produced some letters to his friends where he was describing the processes of his poetry and who he is and what he thought that he believed poetry to be. And he described it as a seer. And in one of his letters, and this author is up on the Omnidimensional Authors page, and I'll keep adding the links and the people as I go here, but I needed to get this out, and get this series started on Omnidimensional Authors. Arthur Rimbaud, basically, in a nutshell, wrote in his letter that he disoriented all of his senses, all of his known senses, and went into a vastness of space, which any channel, any medium, anybody that's accessed different dimensions outside of our known reality. Sorry, my battery's getting low, so battery pack. Anybody who is doing some kind of practice that is he called it disorienting the senses, going into a space where he received information. And that's where he was getting his information, his inspiration, and he called it being a seer. Now, being a seer and the word seer has been around for a very long time, but that's what he called it. So I immediately started recognizing, oh, he's describing an OA's process. He's actually describing it, which is something that not a lot of people did, because, like I said, that heresy, if you actually use your real name, that's why people use pseudonyms, but I actually prefer to call them, like Fernando Pessoa, heteronyms, because Fernando Pessoa was reclaiming that magical, spell over a fake name and saying, no, these different beings within my one physical being have their own distinct personalities. They are distinctly different. The medical community can call him, schizophrenic or something. But Fernando Pessoa published under 78 heteronyms and was not called schizophrenic, was classified and has been classified in literary history as a very prolific writer. He even had different astrological charts for his heteronyms. So I call them now heteronyms too, because there's nothing that is fake about the different beingnesses that are within even myself. And that's because I am living dimensionally and have been living dimensionally for years, this entire lifetime, for multiple lifetimes. And I am calling that out too. Dimensionality has definitely been coming up and on the rise for decades now. Like I said, 3D, 4D, 5D, 6D, 7D. D is dimension. So, whatever moniker people are calling it, look to see what they're actually talking about. Because if they're talking about dimensionality, then yes, it is aligned with what it is that this new literary personage or title that I am putting out there now into the world and calling people forward to evaluate if they are using those alternative abilities and what they're doing, if they know other people that are, if they know historical writers and poets and authors that have been, so we can add them to the canon. Um, Anyways, Arthur Rimbaud started using this word seer, and it really didn't carry a whole lot. He wrote these letters in the 1800s to, personal people, and Arthur Rimbaud did not become a hugely prolific poet during his life. In fact, even afterwards, it wasn't really a big thing in the world. But in the last 100 years, he's had his letters, published. I think it's been over 100 years now, and people have been seeing and recognizing his wisdom and what it is that he was describing all the way back then in the early 1800s as a process of what I'm saying is an OA. Because I immediately started resonating with, yeah, when I like astral travel, when I am channeling, when I am in whatever state or definition that other people are like, how are you receiving this information? It's like you're not in physical form and you're in physical form. And at the same time, you're opening up to what a lot of people call the Akashic records, or like the everything. And I know that there are varying gradients of everything because physical form has a very difficult time being able to assimilate different levels of frequency and vibration and energy. But that's what he was starting to describe. So that's when the canon really started for me. And I had been recognizing the other authors, and then I started looking for them. And since I was at Naropa, I was with Anne Waldman, overseeing my MFA. I literally had my MFA being produced and working with one of the original beat poets. And I started looking into the beat poets because I knew that they were progressive and I knew that they had helped align with Naropa. And I did an honoring of our entire Naropa catalog of all of the people that had been instructors while I was at Naropa. So it wasn't quite for the full 50 years because they're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, because it was in 1974 that they started. But within the, up to like 45 years, I had done an honoring. And so I was pulling all of the historic records for what was, a piece for my course, but it ended up being put into the archives, and it ended up being really research into omnidimensional authors that first helped me get to them. So one of the things that I found out in one of my symposiums, and this is how they've just all started coming in over the last 6 years. In one of my symposiums at Naropa, we had a graduate student of CUNY, New York, that had done their PhD and had been working with Diane DePrima, who again is another noteworthy beat poet, a very noteworthy beat poet. And come to find out, this PhD had been publishing articles on her notes. She had gotten access from Diane at the end of her life, on her notes from when she was younger and the things that she was doing. And the researchers started discovering and asking her, well, you're talking about channeling here, and you're talking about authors that were dead many years before you were at that age, and that you were talking to them in these notes, like Percy Shelley. And she was like, yeah, because I've been a medium my entire life. And it was like all the light bulbs went off for this person, and as soon as she said that, I was just like, "Holy shit." Like, Diane DePrima is a fucking OA too, because she has been channeling and purposely was channeling at that time in her life as a teenager when she decided to become a poet. So it's like we have existed forever in so many different people in so many different ways, and nobody has ever called us out. Nobody has ever given us a direct moniker or a personage or somewhere to say, yeah, I'm in that canon with Diane DePrima. I'm in that canon with Arthur Rimbaud, and this is why, because they were channeling and they produced notes and they produced pieces all of their life or most of their life, or they produced one or two pieces that were through channeling. They were through an alternative ability that they received information and they put that out into a literary or a media piece for others to be able to access. So, anyways, then it started really coming through. Then I started really looking into this because that was a big aha for me. I'm just like, holy crap, Diane DePrima was a medium. And I had already been being told by people at Naropa in the poetics department about different people. So one of my advisor, actually, who is a brilliant poet, and he does so much for the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, Jeffrey, like I am eternally grateful because he brought up some other OAs for me that when I started looking into them, I was like, of course. And the first one was Hannah Weiner. I was just like, are you kidding me? She literally produced a piece called Clairvoyant Journal, 1974. So again, Naropa was founded in 1974 based on poetics with Trungpa Rinpoche and Waldman and a couple of beat poets in 1974. And then Hannah Weiner, in a different kind of element of poetry back in New York, is actively channeling and titling her pieces Clairvoyant Journals. And her pieces are brilliant. I actually had channeled as soon as I found Hannah Weiner, I immediately tried to tap in and I had one channeling session with her. Her soul's already been reincarnated, and it was an infant at the time that I was accessing. So the memories of the life as Hannah Weiner came through to a certain extent. And man, it was crazy. I'll tell you, I'm probably going to eventually produce these pieces because I put her channeling that I had with her into a piece that I produced at Naropa within my MFA. Hopefully these kind of things will help other people recognize that if they're doing these things and they didn't have a name for it before and they didn't realize that they were doing other things that other noteworthy poets and authors have been doing, you do now. That's what I am here to do, amongst other things. Call out my personage and who I am and how I know it's connected to multiple people, but also help other people actively now using their alternative abilities, producing literary pieces, putting it out into the world and defining it and actively participating in who we are, that the literary community is just never fully recognized. It's not like Diane DePrima went around and said that I'm a medium, right? But Hannah Weiner did. And she did it like adamantly. And if you read her works, and I will put up as many links on cannabistarot.com on the Omnidimensional Author webpage and the Canon webpage. I will try and put up as many pieces as I can, links to free PDFs, downloads of all of these people, because I absolutely believe in free access to information. I'm always searching for free access to information as a PhD researcher. I do not like how, academia has closed off the walls to knowledge and research for the last 100 years under the guise of money and monetization. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that that's the way our libraries are formed, the way our education system was formed back in, Greek and even pre-Greek times. So I will always try to put up links if I can find them to the actual PDFs. And I have a link on the Omnidimensional Authors page to Hannah Weiner. I think that I've already put her up. I started with another author, but I'm going to be working on it this week. I plan to have more up on the page, but for people that are watching this after today's live, you'll see more on the page with more links. So anyways, Hannah Weiner, 74, The year that Naropa started, I'm like, okay, there's already a golden thread starting to come out here. And then I found Diane DePrima, and then I found her channeling. And then I had another author, James Merrill. Okay, so James Merrill, yes, of the Merrill Lynch family and money, noteworthy author. He produced a bunch of pieces through a Ouija board and through divination tactics. And so divinatory poetics is out there, but that is not the entirety of authors, poets, writers that are using alternative abilities. That's just one subset of what an OA actually is. So even though divinatory poetics have existed now for decades, that's a subset of what actually that author, that poet is, which is an omnidimensional author. So James Merrill produced a bunch, and I don't know if people know this, but W.B. Yeats' wife was a medium and produced a piece that she never received full credit as an author for, but she absolutely is an OA. And that was a lot of channeling sessions that W.B. Yeats put in his name, but that she's never received authorship, but she's absolutely an OA. And during the same time, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's wife was also a medium and channeling, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle produced pieces from his wife's channeling. Now, because of all of this rise of mediumship, and with the cyclical society and parapsychology starting as an active academic research based like industry or division field, right, in the turn of the century, late 1800s, that's why the Cummings case in England came about. And I'll try and remember to put up the link for the Cummings case. You can just do a Wikipedia search and find it. But that's why it said that mediums and authors, people that brought the information from ineffable spaces or different dimensions or different beingnesses, as the translators, they are the cited resource. So both W.B. Yeats' wife and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as well as many other mediums who people took their channelings and produced them as a literary piece under that other person's name, have never fully been diagnosed, but they absolutely eventually need to be, because they are omnidimensional authors and they absolutely should have their pieces attributed to them, because under the legal parameters for the last 100 years, they are the legitimate authors. And so there's so many that started to come out of the woodwork for me. But I want to, keep this to a reasonable length here, because there's so much to go into about omnidimensional authors, or OAs, you guys. And so I encourage you, add people, investigate different pieces or works that you found over the years. Look for the defining characteristics, whether it's yourself, a friend, somebody that you know that's publishing, somebody you've read recently, somebody that is in, literary history. Send them to me so that we can start evaluating them as a part of the OA canon or of authorship, because I know that there's just so many more OAs out there, even actively right now. But one of the things that came through this summer, and I knew without a doubt, I've been at CIIS now for 3 years, working on my doctorate, and I knew that when I got shifted out of Harvard and into Naropa and then CIIS, which CIIS and Naropa are linked, because they're kind of like part of this very exclusive academic community that's based off of Indian and Eastern Asianic, Indo region theologies and concepts. So I didn't know entirely until the summer what CIIS was actually based off of, and I was so grateful for this course. So I took a course with our instructor, Debashish, and Debashish is a scholar of CIIS's founder, Haridas Chaudhry. And Haridas Chaudhry was a scholar and actually, involved with Sri Aurobindo and the mother at the turn of the century. And he founded CIIS based off of Sri Aurobindo and the mother's um, uh, theory of integral yoga. Now, integral yoga is not what a lot of people think that yoga is. Yoga as a physical form is only one aspect of it. Integral yoga is even beyond what Ken Wilber has been trying to promote for decades now. Integral yoga is based off of Sri Aurobindo and the mother's work 100 years ago. And Sri Aurobindo himself was calling um, uh, the processes, and he produced this brilliant piece called The Future of Poetry. So he was a poet, he was an author, he absolutely is an omnidimensional author, and so is the mother. The mother exclusively almost practiced within channeling and within the clairs and her clair abilities. And between the two of them, they considered their two different bodies one union of two physical different bodies, but they both were receiving information from different ways and translating it into literary works 100 years ago that spoke to Arthur Rimbaud 100 years before Sri Aurobindo, because Sri Aurobindo called people and poets seers. He was using the same terminology, using the same parameters around the definitions that Arthur Rimbaud had already published in his kind of more private letters 100 years prior to Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo started calling things multidimensional and started referring to processes with this multi approach in his writings. If you read, and I'll post a lot of the free PDFs for him as well when I add his name to the Omnidimensional Author canon page. If you read through his Integral Yoga 1, 2, and 3, if you read to his, different pieces like The Future of Poetry, you're going to start seeing similarities in this golden thread that's going through his works and what him and the mother were channeling that is related to this. And when I came into this 100 years later, right? Arthur Rimbaud, the 1820s, Sri Aurobindo, the 1920s, Beautiful Existence, B3, Bella Irons, the 2020s. Like, we are literally in these cycles, these astrological cycles, these cycles of enlightenment at different levels coming back into the realism, and we're being called the same spells, and what I'm being called to is to redefine the spells, because in that last 100 years from the previous 100 years, it's kind of coming in and out a little bit here. We're receiving any and all frequency information from any and all beingness. So omnidimensional is the new iteration. And I received this confirmation this summer when I took Devashish's course, who is a scholar, a known scholar in not only our founder at CIIS, Haridas Chaudhry, but we based the majority of our course this summer in Sri Aurobindo and the mother's writings, and it finally all started making sense to me, that this work that I've been doing for all of these years, this thing that I've been feeling inside of me, this name, this moniker, this, literary personage that's never been fully diagnosed within literature, that's never been allowed to be ourselves, to be proudly talking about our alternative abilities and how we're receiving information and we're translating it and we're putting it out there for other people's access. It's been a legal parameter in the world for 100 years. And we have not known this. Nobody has been saying this or calling this out until now. And that's what I'm doing. That's one of the things that I'm here to do. That's who I am in this lifetime, and it's who I'm going to continue to be. So I encourage you, please go on to the cannabistarot.com website, look at the Omnidimensional Author page. I'm going to continually keep adding people. Email me. I have an email link on the page. I think I do. I'm going to definitely have it on the page here pretty soon. Tell me other people that have been describing their alternative abilities. I might not have all the alternative abilities right now. I've tried to be as prolific in the alternative abilities as I can, but living dimensionally means and has so many different monikers and so many different definitions to it. And there could be somebody that's doing something out there that I don't currently have under the alternative ability, definition or understanding, and they could be completely prolific in their writings, in their dealings, in their processes. So I am calling out everybody as much as possible. Let's start building this canon. Let's start bringing back this information. Let's start regrounding our remembering of who we are, all of our abilities to be able to do stuff. And in particular, those of us that are translating them and that we are reproducing this information from unknowable spaces to others into the world, like many, many other authors and poets have been doing for hundreds and thousands of years. We've existed forever. Oracles have been being translated forever. Where are all of the omnidimensional authors? This canon is extensive. It is it is monumental within the literary community, and we are absolutely out there, and we are producing known literary pieces, media pieces in this world, and we're not being recognized for it, which is based on our alternative abilities and our translation of it. That's where the legal parameter comes in. That has been established for over almost a century now. Our translations of it is the key. It is us using our alternative abilities and translating this so that others can receive that information that we already know that we're getting. So, anyways, I know that this has been a long live. Thank you for being here again. I'm so excited to get this out here. This summer, I finally was told by some of my guides, future persons that I've been channeling since 2012. They finally told me, they're like, it's time, it's time, it's time. They kept saying it over and over. And I was just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, all this stuff started coming together. And it's like, wow, I've been being led down this road this whole time. And I had really no idea what all of this meant until lately. And this summer, one of the things I'll leave you with this. When I brought up the terminology that Sri Aurobindo and the mother had been talking about in their multiple pieces, the multidimensionality, when I started bringing that up and I said, it's not multi, it's omni, because we are literally accessing anything and everything all of the time. And omni has been coming to me since 2015, since I married myself. So I have an omni manifesto for people that are polygamists like me, that I will put out there as well. But omni has been sitting with me for a very long time, for even longer than the omnidimensional authors canon or the omnidimensional authors or OAs have even been in my present consciousness. So Omni has been out there. And when I asked my instructor Debashish this summer, I said in a discussion, it's not multi, it's not just multiple, it's everything, it's anything. It's like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. That is literally what all of these different OAs have been describing or accessing or communicating, uh, uh, translating, to others however they can with our language and our words. It's omnidimensional, and he agreed. He's like, it is omnidimensional. And so I was just like, that's it. This is being put out there because it's time. It's time that we start recalling all of this for humanity, for posterity, so that people will not be afraid of their alternative abilities anymore, and they will realize that this is a vast amount of inspiration, information, otherness that can finally be translated back into other people's awarenesses again through literary and media participation. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm super excited to finally start having OAs out into the world, and we can start, congregating and I'm sure having retreats and doing all sorts of stuff. I am absolutely going to start approaching literary conferences. If you know literary or poetic conferences, please also send them to me. Um, already have this fall during the Halloween season a couple of different alternative and independent bookstores that are big bookstores in the Seattle area that we're going to be having omnidimensional author sessions for people to bring their pieces to, for people to, you know, be able to read, to be able to talk about their processes, their alternative ability processes, and the pieces that they've produced, the things that they've read that they believe are part of the canon, and anything and everywhere in between. So look for me to post those. I will start doing probably a monthly newsletter through the Cannabis Tarot again. And that's mostly because this activation with cannabis plant spirit and Madame Lenormand has really amplified in this lifetime a lot of the cultivation that I've been doing now for decades. And so I want to make sure that I'm always honoring cannabis plant spirit for being such an amazing fucking guide for me in this lifetime and many lifetimes. And just the powerful, powerful, you know, divination tool that it is, and that it's still in a very sacred, you know, purchasing kind of spell. So you have to only get it through me. It's not commoditized. It's not monetized like a lot of the other decks that you'll ever find. And the Oraculum is out there. That is a more open bibliomancy tool. And I know that it is prolific throughout the world now. The network of people that have the Oraculum through Amazon and the different Amazon territories throughout the world, please get in touch with us too. I'm sure that there's many, many OAs within that network as well. But thank you for being here, and thank you for listening, and for, you know, thinking about and contemplating yourself or other people or other literary or media works as part of the OA canon. Because, yeah, we've been here for a very long time and we've had legal precedents for a long time, you guys. So we need to actively start utilizing this again so that the rest of the world can know that the alternative abilities that they have access and remembering to are just as valid as what they might be experiencing in silence, and they don't need to anymore. So, like I said, thank you for being here, and I'm going to end this, and we'll do another live next weekend. If you have anything about omens too, bring that up. The book is coming through actively right now, and it's going to be published before the end of this year. So, lots of omens starting to come through as well. Definitely an OA kind of, you know, life, channeling, recalling, being open to omens, you know, definitely coming through different dimensionalities through weather, celestials, animals. So yeah, bring those in too. But have a wonderful rest of your day or wherever you are. And yeah, we'll talk again soon. So bye.